Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here you can find the recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: Sound Effects, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game Sound Con, Kilohertz, Revroom, Soundcut, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
Welcome to this AirWiggles talk. My name is Bjorn Jacobsen. I work as the only audio designer on a big project called PAX Day up in Finland. And let's take a look at it. So PAX Day is this gigantic 300 square kilometer map. It involves crafting, combat, medieval lore, PvP, PvE, sandbox, and all that. The maps are pretty big and so on. We're about 60 plus devs. They're all located all over the world: Finland, Iceland, and some people are remote. Like if Finland and Iceland weren't remote enough, then there's me from Denmark and some from Australia and a couple of others. And I'm the only sound guy. So just a little bit about me, the only sound guy in this project. I'm 43, actually, yes, still am. In 21 days, I won't. But anyway, I have 3 kids. They're all girls. Been making games for many years. I have I'm fortunate enough to have a YouTube channel that has a following, which is nice. I've worked on 20 plus games, made a lot of games with Wwise, and Wwise is the primary reason this talk is even possible. And I made a lot of records in the past before I started making games. Now let's take a look. These are some of the games that I've worked on, not necessarily in this order, but they come in all sizes, big and small. Some are 1 person in a bedroom. Others are 300, 500, 1,000 people plus. So let's, I've tried it all. And now I work alone, or at least the people that I might be working with aren't necessarily here. So I usually just sit here alone in my studio, which is a nice place because we just moved. So PAX Day, it's going to be big. I will be alone and it'll be very lonely. That's how I joined the project to begin with. And it's not procedural, but it will be extremely random, and will require like literally everything I can squeeze out of Wwise, because there will be a lack of code support and a lack of implementation here and there. So I will require to seriously push my Wwise knowledge out of this and use Wwise to its fullest. And because I'm alone, there's no one to stop me where I'm going when I'm doing this. Yeah, very lonely. That fits my introverted self. I'm a very expressive, outgoing person, and because I'm introverted, then I need to be alone. That kind of counters, but that's how it works. And there's still nobody to stop me whenever I have an idea. Anyway, PAX. I started on the project like a couple of years back. 4 years ago, and when you open Unreal, it looks like this. And when you open Wwise, it looks like this. And there was absolutely nothing in there, and there wasn't any audio in the game, and there was nothing. So when you press play in the game, even though the editor looks like that, the game ends up like this. That is what the game looks like when you press play in that empty Unreal project. So I had to add all the audio. I know there's audio in those videos, but that's because it's videos from how the game is today. But the game literally looked like that as well 4 or 5 years ago when you press play. I started then from scratch. Let's see how we're going to approach this. And I started writing the PAX Day audio Bible. It doesn't say much in this Bible, but I had to figure out, like, what do I need? Because there's going to be a lot of content to be made, and there's going to be a lot of Wwise implementation to be done, and so on. And there was no programmer assigned to me. So I kind of had to write down what I wanted. What do I need for biomes? What types of biomes will there be? And how do I want my time of day cycle to be? What about the player? These are like the basics that I wrote down just even before I even had an idea about how this game is going to sound, just to make sure that I have a list and I can start with that list, and at least I have the basics. And I'll be like, the player can walk, run, and sneak. Maybe we would need some kind of surface detection. What if the player jumps? What if the player lands? What about the enemies? They will make grunts when they attack, when they die, and so on. One of the things that I kind of wanted from the very start is to be able to detect the health level of the NPCs. What if they're close to dying, and so on. One of the things that kind of always bothered me, not in other games, not because they sound bad, but a lot of other games seem to have the enemies, they sound like they are at full vigor right until the moment they die. And I kind of wanted them to sound like that they are extremely injured right before they die. So I started this idea about having a health level for the NPCs. Anyway, after writing, I had to start deciding. The editor still looks like this, and there's no level to edit because everything is streamed. I don't know the technical term for it when our build engineers and stuff work on it, but the level looks like this. So I can't open up any level and start adding audio kinetic AK rooms or portals or anything like that. I had to figure out how are we going to make ambient sounds when there's nothing I can add in the actual editor. So after I started deciding how to do that, I started adding all of these switches, states, and whatnot I need in my Wwise project. So these are before I even started adding sounds. So you can probably see my mouse cursor. The biome type of states, the time of day state, and then the basics that would always be needed are: we playing the game or is the game paused? Is the player alive or is the player dead? But most importantly, when you have a multiplayer game, is this the local player? Yes or no? Because then we can make a systemic approach to tags and all these things of gameplay tags on animations. And then if it's me, it plays one sound, but if it's someone else, it may play a different attenuated sound, or may have different priority settings or different rules of limitations. But my sounds always play, and that way we can split the whole project up in two. Are we up on a mountain? Are we down in a pit? What type of surface are we on? All these things that I had written in my Bible previously, the Bible, about how do I want this to sound? And the same thing goes with all these RTPCs, because Unreal Engine allows very easy parsing of information, variables, and values and stuff around in blueprints, or at least somehow in code or in data assets and so on. And Wwise is really good at just receiving variables, switches, and states and content like that, and live in Wwise. And that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted stuff to live in Wwise, because since I had almost no code support, I didn't know I couldn't rely on blueprints or code to be set up for me. I would need information to be sent to Wwise and to the AK component, and then work inside Wwise. So first things first, I have this blueprint called the player audio component, which controls everything on any player, not just the local player, but any player who's playing the game. So that's me and others. And it simply checks, is the owner character, is that locally controlled, yes or no? Because if I'm not, that switch, as I mentioned before, is set to local player, not local player, so that it will trigger different events depending on if we are there or not. And also this controls, will the ambient system start on every player character? No, it will not. It will only trigger on us and so on. And I want to use as few AK components as possible, because then we can feed them as many variables as possible and then live off these. For example, because this is the local player, some of these RTPCs are just global, because I know that I'll only be needing them in one spot. But let's say, how fast is the player moving? Just a simple vector velocities thing, calculate those numbers, send an RTPC to a global parameter. But also the player altitude. I'll need to know, where is my player? Simply because I know on the X, Y, Z axis, is he up on a mountain or is he down in a pit? Then we can just simply calculate that and set an RTPC as well. By doing so, we can then change everything that we want depending on altitude. And that could be literally anything. We have all these, because we only have one component, we can feed it everything we want. How much is it raining? What's the player's speed? What's the altitude? What's the player's health? What's the player's stamina, etc.? Feed all those. Even if I don't need them, they'll still being fed, because maybe I need them in the future. A lot of the RTPCs that I added, they weren't in the game. So I either needed to find a place in code or in blueprints where this value is available, or I had to ask someone to make it available and send it to the player's AK component, such as what's the slope of the hill that I'm walking on and so on. But we made it quite clear from the very get-go to, fortunately, most of the other devs that any value that you can feed me, please do. Because if I don't use it, it doesn't cost us anything. But if I do use it, it could mean the whole difference to how this project is going to sound. So this is the weather channel. It simply double checks every half second what is the weather like in our parameter values. It's just this component that loads. How much is it raining? How wet is the ground? How windy is it? What's the temperature in Celsius? What's the time of day cycle, etc.? And it just keeps on loading all that. And all these values I can use to feed my ambient system. And this is still before I've made any content, by the way. How many flies are in the game? What's the humidity of the place that I'm at? If I'm in a swampy area, the level designer could probably feed me information about is the ground damp, etc. So let's start making content. And these are typical effect chains that I do. Most audio engineering teachers that I've been to school with say that I do it wrong because I compress stuff too much, but who are they to tell me what to do, right? You should just break the rules if someone says there are rules. These are typical projects for me. Up on the left, you see some of the music stems that I put together. And on the right, this Cubase project is all of my footsteps. And this effect chain is, I think this is one of the spells that I made. What rules? To not set. Nah, there aren't. Nico is asking if there's a reason to not set parameters that only exist for one instance globally instead of on the component. The thing is that what if I want them to work as well on other players or other items or so on? Then it's easy. Then that would be the reason to do so. But primarily because I knew that. Like for example, player altitude, maybe other items in the game will need that information. So I do the calculation once and set a global RTPC, then other AK components can use that information. Then I don't have to point at a specific AK component. All right. And this video always starts twice. Anyway, in the end of the game, all those sounds that you just heard in this video, this is just my Cubase project put together. It'll end up something like this. All right. That's a snippet of the game, just a bunch of attacks and spells and felling of trees and so on. And I don't know if you can imagine, it's taken me a couple of years to do this, but that's a lot of content, especially if you're there alone. Of course, I did have friends and people in the industry help me out, maybe do recordings or feed me stuff or help me out doing a certain type of content and so on. But eventually, nothing has gone into this game that hasn't been here on this computer. So I have a global component and a music component and the player related components and so on, and NPC components, single use components, because if we need sounds that responds in one situation and so on. So we have ambient that plays, and we have grunts of these components and of locomotion sounds of when we are walking and so on. It takes player speed, is the armor worn, is the player health and the surface type and so on. All this takes it into account because Wwise can use this to our advantage, or at least my advantage. I can increase the size of my Wwise project so that I don't have to rely on switches or any kind of setup in Unreal. Not that I don't want that to happen, but because of a project of this size and my experience with working with bigger projects, then we have a problem because usually if you set up something in Unreal or similar, then quite soon someone will knock on your door and say, oh, we're changing the code. We're switching from blueprints to code, or we're switching from code to blueprints, or we're going to data sets or anything like that. And then you have to redo it anyway. So might as well, if I can, just have one event that triggers ambience and then live off these parameters, because the parameters will always live. The events and how that is structured won't. So in our ambient setup, we have this ambient setup where it just takes into account what is the type of biome that we have and what's the time of day. Time of day is simply a 24-hour structure, just a 24-hour RTPC that switches back and forth and tells me if it's dawn, dusk, midday, night, or whatever it is. And then it plays the corresponding sound. In this case, just for the sake of the example, it's the barren. It's like a 2D bed, and it plays these random birds that spawn around you, and some timing of insects and so on. And that all plays accordingly so that the overall ambient soundscape is seemingly random. Well, it is random, but it's never the same. It takes the RTP's altitude, which was global, by the way, into account, and then sort of checks if you're above a certain height, like if you're up on a mountain, then the insects don't play, or a different insect play, or you can set the switch to say that if I'm up on the mountainside, then it's a different type of bird, and so on. And if the ground is wet, then the volume of the birds is low because then it has been raining, or it's a different type of insect. The insects are lower if the ground is wet. And that also changes the type of footstep that I have. So that from the video that you saw with my Cubase project, then the footsteps sound dry, but if it's been raining, then the footsteps will start to sound more soggy as we walk across. Also, if you go swimming and go into water, we force the parameter of wetness to 100 and just go back to 0 over 5 seconds. So the first couple of seconds it sounds like your feet are wet. There is this parameter called biome depth. Biome depth means that it's 0 when you cross the barrier between two biomes. Let's say you go from barren to mountainside or forest. Then the biome depth is 0, which means that I can, even if it's two radically different biomes, I can sort of lower the sound of birds and so on, or the more distinct sounds of that biome. I can lower those when you're close to the border between the two. And then as you go into the biome, the volume of certain things go up, or even if you go deeper in, something goes lower. In that way, you can also say that if you're walking around inside of the biome, even if you just walk further into the biome, maybe the birds sound a little more harsh, or the actual overall soundscape gets a little lower, or the pitch changes and so on. That's what I mean by from scratch knowing that this kind of information, biome depth, can be used for so many things. I have the parameter, I only need it once, and then I can just draw, just like I would with automation in my digital audio workstation, then I just draw RTPC curves like these. Like in this here, like I mentioned before, if it's been raining, if it is raining, then the birds are lower in volume. If the wind is really high and the wind, you start to hear the wind, then it sort of ducks some of the volume of the rain. The overall 2D ambience gets muffled a little and so on. And all that comes together and you have these crazy, stupid RTPC curve. This is just for the sake of the example because I would never look at them like this otherwise. But how much is it raining? What's the biome depth and all these things? What's the altitude of my player? Depending on, so simply to control which birds and what insects do I hear where. Here's a good example. Right. So you are correct, Karina. It's one of those things where it's hardly noticeable if you move around. And of course, now I'm changing these parameters really quickly just to, for the sake of the example. But the whole point is that when you move about, if you're moving around, let's say it's 10 by 10 meters in the forest, then that changes a little what type of insect is more audible there than over here. What about the birds? What about the cicadas in the background? What if it's wet? Then there are no cicadas and so on. And yes, as some of you are thankfully pointing out, the ambience is supposed to be nice. The whole thing, one of the things that I really wanted about this game is that if you don't really play the game, but you just want to walk around in the forest or in the landscape and so on, it should still sound nice. It should sound real. It should sound like the ambience that you really want and so on. Maybe you should just put out an ambience record and put it on Spotify, and then you can listen to it with these fake ambiences, because most of these birds are me saying weird noises and pitching them up, and the cicadas is my microwave because it makes weird noises when it's doing stuff to an electrostatic microphone and so on, and you just pitch that up. So all this is super fake, but it's still nice to listen to, but nonetheless. Playing twice, please. Thank you. This one won't work. I don't know how audible that was, but you'll get the point that if you go up in the altitude, then you don't hear birds the same way. I have this thing with thunder that was added to the game at one point. It's not in the game, but it's a really nice feature that I made, that when you see the lightning in the foreground, the lightning and the sound of the thunder is actually delayed depending on where you are in the game. So, yeah. And thanks to my friend Gabriel for helping me out record most of those rain sounds. So, how to make the player character when... Yes, thank you. Ambience is one of the most important things. I wrote my thesis about stuff not getting boring and not being a nuisance to the player. One of the things that was really important to me was to actually figure out which sounds will you hear the most and make sure that those are the ones that gets the most quality. And in pretty much every game, that is not the gunshot. It's not the explosion. It's not the one cool sound or the spaceship that flies by and so on. Of course, those still have to be cool, but the ones that you need to take really extra care of are the sounds that you hear all the time, such as footsteps, birds in the background, rain sounds, stuff when you move about, and so on. One of the things that I'm not covering, but I can show you in my Wwise project, is that everything in this Wwise project is literally going to its own bus with a meter, so that footsteps lower themselves if they've been on for a couple of seconds and so on, simply because it's only important to hear the footsteps when you start walking. When you've been walking for 2 seconds, don't bother with them, so that the volume always comes in and out of everything though. So just so that nothing is at the same volume all the time, even if you're moving about. Same with the trees and same with the insects. If you're moving about in the forest, all this stuff changes. On our character, we have this thing. It plays whatever he's wearing, or she, or whatever person it is, plays the pants, the shirt, the footwear, everything on our character. It checks what material are we on. First of all, are we in water or are we above the water? Are we below the water or just in the water swimming? What's the ground wetness? Will it play wet gravel or will it play dry gravel? And on some materials, the slope is added to it. So if you're on a gravel or rocky side, then there is an RTPC that checks what's the slope. So if you're on said material and on a slope and you're walking downhill, then the rocks sound in one way, but if you're walking uphill, then they sound slower. The same with the footsteps. They sound a little darker or a little pitched down if you're walking downhill, and pitched up if you're going uphill, just to change it. So this is part of my Wwise project. My player locomotion structure. This is just for mandling. And it just checks. It's just a switch container that knows I'm wearing chainmail or cloth or heavy metal armor, etc. And then it plays that together with my footsteps in work like this. Let's unmute. That is if you change armor, so that the first one is just you're wearing normal shoes. And if you then start wearing chainmail or heavy metal boots or clothing, etc., it adds this armory sound when you're walking about. The same goes for the ground wetness. If you increase the ground wetness, then it is a little delayed because it's filtering over time, just so that it doesn't sound like a puddle if you step in a puddle all of a sudden, because there is a puddle material for that. And then it sounds a little more wet when you're walking on the wet ground. And here comes the rocky landscape, up and downhill. It just normalizes a bunch of vectors. I totally stole this from one of the VFX artist, or the VFX artist at the time. He was also alone. We were very lonely together, by the way. We had some really good night sessions, because one evening, I think at 11 p.m. or something, he writes me and says, "Oh, I just found this slope thing up and downhill," and I ended up in bed at like 3 a.m. because we implemented this together and had a nice ping pong session about adding slope. And that was really useful. You can hear it here. Yeah, so you hear the little rocks come down the mountain if you're walking up the hill. Being together alone is the best alone there is. Exactly. So my music setup, originally there was a composer assigned to the project. Well, there still is, but he composed the original theme and some intro tracks and a bunch of stems and so on. And we needed much more music than that. So I also ended up composing like 99% of the music here. If there wasn't enough content to do already, but I'm quite proud of the soundtrack. It's very ambient and so on. You'll be able to hear it if you ever play the game or if we ever put out the soundtrack. But it's quite a pretty standard musical setup. I know the setup in Wise can seem super crazy and can quickly get out of hand and seem very hairy, but it straight up just checks, are you in the menu or are you in the game? Are you in the game? Then are you in an ambient environment or a combat environment? So enjoy my audio designer art, by the way. I hope there's no UI designers here to bug me about how bad of a drawer I am. It starts playing the music. It plays the intro of the game. It plays the menu music. It decides if you either go to the character creator or if you load your current character and so on. Then you go to the ambience. Ambience takes into account what's your current biome. There's like 5 tracks for every time of day per biome. So that's 60, 90, 100 pieces of music. They're not that long. But one of the things that I really wanted was to, just like with the sounds, not to ever get boring, not to be repetitive and so on. Every piece of music is kind of short and it's very low. It's kind of subtle. It fits well with the ambience and doesn't really intrude or interfere with your gameplay. It plays in the background, and then whenever it's done playing, there's at least 2 to 5 minutes of silence, or at least I think it's between 3 and 5 minutes of silence between the tracks, simply so that you don't hear a piece of music all the time, because I don't want music to be there all the time. Music is there when you're in combat, but not when you're in the ambient environment. It's just there to fit together with the ambience of the birds and all that stuff. Because even though I am a musician and even though music is awesome, you shouldn't have it on all the time just because. Yeah. Here is the music setup. Starting the game, menu, and ambience, but I also have a video after this where you can actually see it in action. those are just the combat music and the ambience playing and so on. But the combat music, that wasn't meant to be there. But the combat music and the 5 different states of the danger level that you can be in. Let's go. And this is how it would be. The first beginning of the video is darkened because there's a bunch of deaf information there. Yeah, so that's how the music would work if you actually started the game and you were looking for a server in that case. That's the dungeon music, but that is a place in the game where there is music all the time, though, and not just ambience playing when you're in the dungeon. But in the previous early access versions, there was only one track looping all the time. Now we have like 20. So, yeah. And this is what it sounds like if you're in combat, depending on whether it's day or night. Yeah, so daytime and nighttime music is quite different. There's a bug in there. There's phasing at one of the transitions. I need to fix that. Anyway, we also have multiple NPCs in the game that you can fight. You can yeah, you can fight them. But as you saw in the video previously, just with the quick glance where you're fighting these, you can fight multiple of the same type all the time. And one of the things that I really wanted to get rid of was that they don't sound the same, even if there's 2, 3, 20 of the same enemy right next to you. So this is Bob, Kenny, Alex, and Frank, also known as NPC Randomizer 1, 2, 3, and 4, up to 10. This is the grunts based on personality. So they each gain a personality type 1 to 10, and then they use that for the remainder of their life. Let's say this is Bob, and Bob sounds like this. Yeah, this is Bob. Here comes Frank. Number three is totally not me. If we lower the health of the same attack, so the lower their health is, the more it'll sound like the sword is really heavy. And that's part of the audio direction. That I have this audio direction document where it says, for example, for hurt, someone punches your shoulder if you're at full health, and then if you're at medium health, it's someone punches your shoulder and it's starting to not be funny any longer. The next one is when you're low on health, it's you're starting to bleed. When you're near death, it's this hurts and you don't like it. Yeah, that is quite a lot of dialogue editing. Actually, I have a picture of my Reaper project afterwards so you can see this. Anyway, so add grunts in between heavy grunts. It just checks so that if the heavy grunt is played multiple times right after each other, it plays the light version within the first 3.5 seconds, just so to make sure that he doesn't say all the time, even though he's randomized. Then he does say, and then the next one is it's a little lower in volume because we use these gameplay tags to tell each character how to respond to certain things. So this would probably just play the attack grunt attack and the attack grunt light, and attack grunt light would then just be lower in volume. And it sets the NPC randomizer. It checks for their health, divides it by 100. So I know, regardless if it has 1 billion in health, it'll still come out as a percentage. So if they're below 20%, the character will sound like they're close to dying. A Gollum and Metal Singer is the same thing. So we're in a band called Lord of the Pax Days. Anyway, in Reaper, you can hang on. Isn't there supposed to be I didn't have a picture of my Reaper session. It was supposed to be there. Anyway, my Reaper session, if you can I can pause there. You can slightly see it. One of the cool things about Reaper is that one of the shortcut keys that isn't assigned by default is the one that's called create region from, I think it create region from take name. So I simply just cut these up, make one long recording and call it by the name. And then the video quality is a little low, but it says here cultist boss number 1. Simply make a render of all these regions, and the regions are named after the take. And then it just comes out as track name, the region name, and then the actual take afterwards. So Reaper is, when it comes to exporting with content like this, Reaper totally does the trick. I hate designing in Reaper, but I really like it for processing and for quick exports of all these. Let's see if we can find the picture afterwards. Anyway, it ends up with all these: the Inquisitor boss heavy attack, the heavy attack injured, the hurt grunt if he's close to dying, if he's not dying, and so on. It's a lot of files, but a lot of files doesn't mean necessarily that it's a lot of editing, because all these are just one giant export. It also means that I can go into Reaper and then on one track add a compressor, for example, and redo all these and export them. They'll have the same name, so I can override my entire project, and then they all come out, and that's it. So a lot of editing, a lot of content, and a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, and that's how I would approach it as a one-man band. Now, I'm going to go over to the Q&A button because I see a lot of questions there, and I haven't even noticed. Here are the default answers, by the way. Here we go. Let's start with Karina here. I don't map this out for every project, but I map it out for this project because it was possible. It depends, of course, on the time scale and the scope of the project and what I need to do and how big is it and so on, but also what is possible, because I do believe that a lot of this is, let's say, overpowered, but I also do it because I want to, and because it's fun to add, and because it, to me, adds a better quality soundscape than most. And most of this is implementation magic, not content magic. That's what I like about it, and that's why I prefer to do it. Did that answer the question, I hope? I don't build my own U of Unreal Engine audio reactive physics systems. I don't. I detect certain kinds in physics, and then I might be doing a switch or some kind of triggering in Unreal. But in this case, I've been doing most of it over in Wwise. Yeah. There we go. And because the company isn't very big, and because we started out as one sound designer, one VFX guy, not one game designer. Of course, the company is bigger than that, but one of the reasons I am alone is also because once you start expanding, first of all, because I was doing fine on my own, but secondly, also because I liked being on my own. And third, once you start expanding, you also need to understand that you are letting go of certain kinds of control. And the Wwise project, the type of everything here, it would require a second chef or something. And there was also budgetary limitations, and also the fact that I never asked if there was funding for someone to join me. All the assets that I need for this project, they are just added to Wwise, and then I keep a tight structure in the originals folder in there. But when it comes to pre-designing all these, I just have a long list, kind of like a Trello board, or just in our case, it's a Jira board or Confluence board, where I just add tons of things to a list and then throw stuff in there, just so that I know what to work on next, but also can rank them after what I find is most important. Let's see here. Here we go. It's not how I generally prefer to work. No, I do like to work with others, but it's been a great learning experience to do this alone. Also because of the sheer volume of content that I needed to do, but also this project has been going on over a long time. So if this was a project that I had to work on and it needed to be done in 6 months, I would probably have approached it differently, or I would have worked on I worked on the sound in a different order, because it's quite important to know when placeholder content is in order and when placeholder content is good enough, until release, or whenever placeholder content can take its place. That's why it's called placeholder. But the most challenging part for this was probably in the times where there was very little code support and I needed to get stuff in, but then also sheer communication between me and everybody else on the team in regards to what do I need in terms of code support, what do I need in terms of design, and what do I need to make sure that this sounds the best, and so on. Simply because everybody was not understaffed, but everybody was working on their own thing, so there wasn't that much time to do much with other developers all the time whenever you needed it. So I couldn't just poke someone and expect them to help me today or tomorrow or in a week. Okay. Pretty much all of them have to be coordinated with devs. The only few that are ready available in Wwise is distance to objects between listener and set object, and diffraction, occlusion, and a couple of other things. But speed of character, etc., and all these things, they are things that I would need to set up manually. But one of the most important things is that I made it clear from the very get-go with the other developers that I want everything exposed and I want to be able to touch and have everything sent to me. And lucky for me on this project, everybody is pretty senior, so nobody asks weird questions like, why do you need this? And if they do, maybe they're asking out of interest and not because they don't want to give it to you. I've tried that with junior programmers in the past, telling them I need this parameter so that I can duck the volume of something when something else plays. And their first question is, why would you want that? Shaking their head in that's not, they can't imagine that sounding good. And in my head, I already know what it's going to sound like. So, yeah. But most of this is not ready-made. The RTPC distance might be the only ready-made one that I've used, actually. The biome depth parameter is a value that is given to me straight up by the level designers who have set up the biomes. So I just get a parameter out of the node in the blueprint that tells me what biome I'm in. So I just switch on that. And then I get a raw value, a float value out of what's the biome depth. And that's the one that I use. So I don't know how it's calculated. I haven't had that many sleepless nights, but I have had some very, very long days. But that being said, I haven't been crunching. I've been working on this out of sheer will and my own time, and as the project required. So I don't feel overworked on this, but I have worked a lot but it's been fun all the way. But there has, of course, been certain moments where because I wanted something, have stayed up longer because I wanted to finish something, because it's me signing off on it. It's not just the project for me. Once I really like a project like this, then I don't mind signing off on it because it's good. And the company, by the way, have been super flexible about if I work late, then I don't have to come in. And there isn't hardly any office hours or anything like that. So it's been very structured and open-minded towards if you work extra, then it's not required or anything like that. No forced overwork. Thanks for all the questions, by the way. All right. So about having a single AK component, it's not a single AK component. I do have multiple AK components, but instead of having an AK component on my character's feet that plays only footsteps, and one on the head that plays helmet sound, and let's say ambience plays in 5 different AK components, then I would have to, let's say, send an RTPC for the speed of the character to the feet AK component and the head AK component and multiple places. If I only have one AK component, it'll sound the same because there's no way to tell where that component is, unless, of course, it's 2 objects that are in 2 different places. But if it's the player, then I only have one place to feed all the variables and all the parameters. Instead of having to look up and cast to foot and cast to other object and so on in Blueprint. Same goes for if this was in Unity, then you would only have to collect your variables in one place instead of in multiple points. And that makes it a lot easier to figure out what's going on. And that's what I meant by some of my RTPCs are global. And that's also the difference between having a state and a switch. If something needs to be global, then it's a state. If something needs to be local, then it's a switch. And that I use that so that every character in the game has one AK component and they're fed the variables that they need, so that I can just do my Wise thing around that instead of having to have 20 AK components and then having to keep track of where they all are. Here we go. How did I prize myself, as in what I cost per hour, or as in how much I've taken care of myself? I have 3 kids and I play a lot of golf, and I still manage to find time for both work and my my life to work together like that. And I've been compensated fair, let's say that. And I do really believe that the way that this company has worked and the way the project is structured and the way our work field is structured, then we've been having a really good time and everything's been very fair. I don't literally just put stuff into Reaper and then batch export them, but Reaper makes it really easy if I have one long recording or if I have 1,000 files that I need, let's say 1,000 files of dialogue and I need them all edited, processed in a certain way. You can add them to one track, select them all. In my case, it's Control K. That makes a region for every take. And then it just maps that out and it names them the same name as the file. I can add my processing chain and then say export as region name. Then the file gets overwritten, but with that processing, and that does it for 1,000 files. Most other workstations require that I do one file at a time or something like that. So I really enjoy if I need to export multiple files. And it's not just 5 files. I mean, I can do that with Cubase or whatever workstation I work with. Cubase is my steady relationship. But if it's 1,000, or as in this case, when it's about, I think each character has about 300 grunts, and that's 300 files per character, and we have 10 men, 10 women, 10 different, several genders, several characters, and then there's bosses, and then there's all the animals as well, and so on, which makes it a lot of files. But because it's in Reaper, I can just add it there and do whatever I need and add the processing and then say overwrite if I need to change something, and then it just works. That's why I use Reaper for that. And it's not that I hate Reaper, I just don't like to design in it. I don't know if there are any tutorials for that kind of batching, but that sounds like a video I should make for my YouTube channel. It's really easy to do, by the way. Yes, there are specific challenges to it, because if you only have, in our case, because in most multiplayer games, the character that you control and the character that someone else controls is technically the same thing. So the most important thing is to make sure that you can distinguish between my sounds and other people's sounds. In that way, I can make sure that if there's 10 people around me, then I can only hear the 5 that are the closest to me, or whatever priority I set. But if it's my sounds, I always hear them. But that also means that, let's say if there are 5 right next to me fighting, then I can hear them clearly. But if I start fighting, then they get lowered and so on. And that's the most challenging part, is the mixing part, when it comes to figuring out what ducks what and when. And you might as well make a very deep structure in the mixing hierarchy, because you'll need it. 50-50, pretty much. No sound is taken directly from a library. All of them have been through my digital audio workstation and edited and processed somehow. But most of the trees, all the footsteps, and and all the spells are synth manipulation and effects and so on. A lot of automation on effects. Yeah. 50-50, I'd say. If I could code properly, then I would probably have been allowed to, yeah, if I asked. That would probably require the programmers to run a very strict code review every time I submit something, but that should be a thing regardless of what your level of coding is. But if I was hired as a sound designer and a programmer, I don't see why not. But I don't code C++. I would like to, but I don't. And I'm bad at math, by the way. So the biomes, the level designers know when you are in a certain biome. So I just have that information, and then it tells me if I'm in barren or forest and so on. And then I have a structure where it transitions 20 or 30-second transition between the two. But then also there is the biome depth, so that biome depth is always 0 when you cross the border, meaning that I can make sure that they all sound kind of neutral when you're close to the border, meaning that walking from one to the other is kind of neutral, making the transition much more easy. Because I can't open a level and just add a box and say that. All I know is the parameters that I was given. So I know that, let's say I'm in barren, what's the time of day? And then what's my altitude? And that I use that to determine how many birds are there and so on. At some point, I would like to know how many trees are nearby, because then I can make the birds louder or distant and so on. And also some, let's say, some of the biomes have trees in some areas, but not in others. And that would make it super valuable. I actually made it through the Q&A. That was a lot of good questions. Thank you all. Thank you all for watching this and coming. If anybody wants to ever reach out for whatever reason, or if you're in Copenhagen, I can be bribed with beer at the office here. Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And if you ever have any questions or anything like that, just feel free to reach out. I'm there for the same, probably. And if you ever watch the YouTube channel or anything like that, just drop questions, and yeah, I'll hopefully be able to answer. And Lewis, I forgot to record locally. Shit. Sorry about that. Oh, one more question. I do prefix them with that. Yeah, I do actually. I do. Over here under events, as you can see, they're all have a naming convention. I have most of the time been following it, but in the beginning I was a little vague about it. But they are called play, and then whatever they do. This is weapon, spear, long, block, drop the ground, play, UI, da 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 da. Sometimes I do not have it named stop, but if it plays a sound, not just if it stops something, but if it plays a sound, it's called play, and then the name, and then underscore stop at the end, simply to, like for a spell sound, for example, it's the casting event that comes in, play, casting sound, and then you cast the spell, and then the ground effect, for example, stops, then it's called play, ground effect, stop, because there is a sound and it makes a wow sound whenever it actually stops. So if it plays anything, it's always called play, and stop is only if it kills something. And you can hear the Thanks for pointing that out, Oz. Actually, it's quite a lot of this project is actually what that video series is based upon. Okay. I need to go sleep. It's almost 1 a.m. here. So thank you all for coming and watching, and I'll see you around. And feel free to reach out if you ever need anything.